Listen closely. Do you hear it? That's the sound of 1,000 men performing love like actors who've forgotten they're on stage. The velvet curtains never close. The audience, she, never leaves. And you, poor fool, you've memorized every line of a play written by someone who despised you. There's an old Bavarian folktale about a woodcutter who fell in love with his own echo. Every morning he'd shout declarations of devotion into the forest, and every morning the echo would return them, word for perfect word. He thought he'd found his soulmate, someone who understood him completely, who spoke his language, who never disagreed. He died of starvation, refusing to leave the spot where love seemed most real. The villagers found him smiling, lips still moving, whispering to the trees. You laugh, but tell me, when was the last time you spoke to a woman without rehearsing the conversation in your head first? When did you last show her your actual face instead of the mask you've carved from her expectations? The modern man has become a method actor in his own life, so committed to the role of the perfect partner that he's forgotten who he was before the audition. You memorize her favorite flowers, peonies, never roses, too cliché, her coffee order, oat milk cortado, extra foam, the exact pressure she likes when you massage her shoulders after work. You've studied her like a doctoral thesis, annotated every mood, cataloged every sigh. But here's the sick joke. The more perfectly you perform love, the less she believes it. Kierkegaard wrote about the sickness unto death, that special flavor of despair that comes from being unable to be oneself. But he missed something darker, the despair of being too good at being someone else. You've become so skilled at anticipating her needs that you've transformed into a ghost who haunts his own relationship. She says she loves you, but which you? The Tuesday you who remembers her mother's birthday? The Friday night you who pretends to enjoy that wine bar where everything tastes like disappointment and costs $40? Or the 3 a.m. you alone in the bathroom, staring at a stranger in the mirror who's wearing your face like a cheap Halloween mask? I knew a man once, brilliant mathematician, the kind who saw patterns in everything, who mapped his girlfriend's menstrual cycle, mood swings, and work stress into an algorithm. He could predict her emotional weather with 87% accuracy. He'd preemptively buy chocolate on day 23, suggest staying in on day 25, plan elaborate dates on day 7 when her dopamine peaked. He thought he'd cracked the code of love. She left him for a bartender who couldn't remember her last name, but made her laugh by accident. The theater of wounds operates on a cruel principle. The more you perfect your performance, the more hollow the applause. Every I love you too becomes another twist of the knife, because you know, God, how you know, that she's responding to a character you've created, not the grotesque, beautiful mess you actually are. There's something almost necrophilic about loving someone who loves your performance. It's like making love to a corpse that looks exactly like you. Technically intimate, fundamentally dead. The candles flicker in your bedroom, casting shadows that look more honest than you do. The wax drips, forming patterns that spell out truths you'll never speak. I don't actually like your friends. Your laugh is too loud. Sometimes I fantasize about disappearing into a country where no one knows my name. But here's where Machiavelli would lean in close, his breath smelling of wine and bitter wisdom. The performance isn't the problem. The problem is that you've forgotten you're the director, not just the actor. You've let her write your script when you should be writing hers. The men who survive love aren't the ones who perform it best. They're the ones who make others perform for them. They understand that every relationship is a power dynamic dressed up in romantic vocabulary. The moment you start dancing to someone else's rhythm, you've already lost. The music was never meant for you. A 24 study from the University of Copenhagen found that relationships where one partner consistently suppresses their authentic responses to maintain harmony show a 73% higher rate of sudden, inexplicable dissolution. The researchers called it performance fatigue. I call it the inevitable finale of a play no one wanted to watch in the first place. So here's my question for you, delivered like a whisper from a stranger in a dark theater. What would happen if you stopped acting tomorrow? If you showed up to love like a man who's forgotten his lines, would she love the stammering truth of you, or would she exit stage left, looking for someone who knows the script? The most dangerous thing about the theater of wounds is that eventually the performance becomes so natural, you forget it's a performance. The mask grows into your skin. The script becomes your thoughts, and one day you wake up as a perfect stranger to yourself. in bed with someone who's in love with a ghost you've been paid to play. But perhaps, and this is the darkest joke of all, perhaps she's performing too. Perhaps you're both actors in empty theaters, performing for audiences who left years ago, too committed to the show to admit that no one's watching anymore. Every woman you've loved still haunts your nervous system. There's a peculiar species of mushroom that grows in the Swiss Alps, Ophiocordyceps helveticus, that infiltrates the nervous system of ants, hijacking their bodies, forcing them to climb to the highest point they can find before dying. The fungus then erupts from their skull, spreading spores to create more possessed insects. Scientists call it parasitic manipulation. I call it a perfect metaphor for how your ex-girlfriends still control your body without being in the room. You think you're choosing when you flinch at the scent of lavender. Rebecca wore it like armor. But your nervous system remembers what your mind pretends to forget. You think you're deciding to avoid that coffee shop on 3rd Street, but Sarah's ghost has already mapped your routes through the city. Every woman you've ever loved has left spores in your spine, and they bloom at the most inconvenient times. During first dates, during sex, during those 4 a.m. moments when you mistake loneliness for clarity. Let me tell you something delicious and terrible. You're not dating new women. You're dating committees. Every romantic decision you make passes through an invisible parliament of ghosts. Would Jennifer approve of this text? Am I being too available? Michelle said that was my problem. Should I wait 3 days to call? Alexandra's rule. Don't mention your father on the first date. Catherine's advice. After that disaster in the Italian place where you cried into your carbonara. The modern man walks through life like a haunted house that doesn't know it's haunted. You've got Victorian ghosts in your attic, your mother, millennial spirits in your bedroom, that girl from college who taught you that love could be weaponized, and fresh poltergeists in your phone, last week's Tinder match who ghosted you mid-conversation about Murakami novels. Schopenhauer wrote that we forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people, but he underestimated. We forfeit ourselves in quarters, parceled out to every person who ever claimed to love us. By the time you reach 30, you're not even a person anymore. You're a democracy of wounds, ruled by a constitution written in other people's disappointments. Here's what they don't tell you about healing. It's not about letting go. The girls who fucked you up, they're permanent residents now. They've been naturalized into your nervous system. That twitch when someone raises their voice? That's Emma, circa 2019, throwing a wine glass at your head. The way you unconsciously hold your breath when a woman says, "We need to talk." That's Morgan's masterclass in emotional terrorism, delivered one Tuesday when you thought you were just coming home to dinner. I once watched a documentary about a man who'd been struck by lightning 7 times. By the 4th strike, he'd developed an unconscious ability to sense storms. His teeth would ache, his hair would stand on end, his joints would throb like prophecies. He couldn't explain it, his body just knew. That's you with love now. Your body has become a barometer for emotional weather, trained by every woman who ever called herself a storm. The taxonomy of ghosts follows a predictable hierarchy. At the bottom, the benign spirits, the 3-week fling who introduced you to Ethiopian food, the summer romance who disappeared into graduate school. These ghosts are almost pleasant, like finding old photographs in books you forgot you owned. They whisper suggestions, not commands. But then there are the malevolent ones. The ones who restructured your DNA through careful application of intermittent reinforcement. The woman who trained you like Pavlov's dog, offering just enough affection to keep you salivating, but never enough to satisfy. She doesn't just haunt you, she reprogrammed you. Now every woman after her inherits a man who treats love like a slot machine, pulling the lever harder each time he loses. A 23 study from the Karolinska Institute found that romantic trauma literally alters neural pathways, creating what researchers call ghost synapses, connections that fire in response to stimuli associated with past partners. Your brain, that traitor, has built monuments to everyone who ever hurt you, and you wonder why you can't love simply anymore. But here's the savage truth that Machiavelli would appreciate. These ghosts aren't just haunting you, you're keeping them alive. You feed them with your rituals of avoidance, your elaborate strategies to never be hurt the same way twice. Every time you check a new girlfriend's Instagram for red flags, you're conducting a seance. Every time you test her loyalty with little traps and manufactured conflicts, you're inviting the dead to dinner. The most successful men, the ones who seem to move through relationships like sharks through water, have learned to make allies of their ghosts. They don't exorcise them, they conscript them. Every wound becomes intelligence. Every scar becomes strategy. They use Rebecca's criticism to sharpen their wit, Sarah's abandonment to perfect their exits, Jennifer's manipulation tactics to recognize and deploy the same weapons. You want to know something that will chill you to your bones? Right now, as you read this, you're exhibiting at least 3 behavioral patterns that you learned from women who no longer remember your last name. You're a museum of other people's damage, curated by ghosts who've moved on to haunt better neighborhoods. So here's my challenge to you, delivered like a diagnosis from a doctor who's tired of lying. Can you name which ghost is speaking when you say, "I love you"? When you pull away just as she's getting close? Whose voice is that in your head? When you sabotage perfectly good things because they feel too easy, which ex is pulling your strings from beyond the grave? The taxonomy of ghosts isn't just about cataloging who hurt you. It's about recognizing that you've become a colony organism, a walking ecosystem of everyone who ever claimed a piece of you. And until you acknowledge the parliament of ghosts that governs your decisions, you'll keep electing the same disasters term after term. Solitude is not the absence of love. It's the presence of self. Shh, do you hear that? That's the sound of a man discovering he actually likes himself when no one's watching. It sounds like silence, but if you listen closer, really listen, it sounds like revolution. I want to tell you about Brother Francis of Padua, except he never existed, and I'm inventing him right now, in this humid moment where the candle smoke makes everything look like a memory. Brother Francis spent 40 years in a monastery, took a vow of silence at 23, broke it at 63 to say a single word, finally. When they asked him what he meant, he returned to silence and smiled, like a man who'd won a bet with God. You see, Brother Francis understood something that modern men have forgotten in their desperate scramble for twin flames and soulmates. The most erotic relationship you'll ever have is with your own solitude. Not loneliness. That's just solitude with performance anxiety. I'm talking about the kind of aloneness that feels like coming home to a house where every room is exactly the temperature you want it to be. There's a Japanese concept, hikikomori, usually translated as social withdrawal, painted by the media as pathology. But what if it's not sickness, but a kind of savage wisdom? What if these men who lock themselves away for months, years, aren't hiding from life but discovering it? Away from the carnival of other people's expectations, they're conducting radical experiments in being human without an audience. The monastery of one doesn't have walls or bells or prayers. It has Tuesday nights eating cereal for dinner while reading philosophy in your underwear. It has Sunday mornings where you don't speak until 3 p.m., and your voice sounds foreign when you finally use it to order takeout. It has that peculiar ecstasy of canceling plans and feeling your whole body exhale like it's been holding its breath since birth. Nietzsche wrote that one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star, but he forgot to mention that the chaos only speaks when everyone else shuts up. In solitude, you discover you're not one person but a parliament of selves, and they've been waiting decades for a chance to debate without interruption. The lonely boy from 3rd grade finally gets to finish his sentence. The ambitious 20-something explains why he gave up. The man you could have been shows up like a ghost from a future you didn't choose, and instead of haunting you, he sits down for tea. Here's what 3 months of chosen solitude does to a man. Based on a 24 study from the University of Osaka, though I'm elaborating with poetic license. First, the panic. Your nervous system, addicted to the cortisol dopamine cocktail of romantic drama, goes through withdrawal. You reach for your phone like a phantom limb. You compose texts to no one. You have imaginary arguments with women who aren't there, winning everyone. Then, around week 6, something shifts. The Croatian writer Slavenka Drakulic called it the third ear. You start hearing frequencies that were always there, but drowned out by the noise of needing to be loved. You notice that you've been clenching your jaw for 15 years. You realize your favorite music was actually her favorite music. You discover that your thoughts, when not interrupted by someone else's needs, move like deep ocean currents instead of surface waves. By month 3, you've become dangerous. Not violent, dangerous. You've tasted what it's like to wake up without immediately calculating someone else's mood. You've discovered that your happiness, untethered from another person's validation, is actually quite portable. You can carry it from room to room, city to city, without asking permission or giving explanations. You've become a nation-state of one, with secure borders and a stable economy. But here's the delicious paradox that would make Kierkegaard weep with recognition. The men who master solitude become irresistible, not because they've learned new tricks or rehearsed better lines, but because they've developed something rarer than gold in our attention-deficit economy. They've become complete. They show up to love not as beggars, but as kings in exile, amused by the game, but not dependent on winning. I knew a man, a painter, though he had given it up for accounting, who took a vow of romantic celibacy for 1 year. No dating, no apps, no flirting, no fantasizing about the barista with the septum piercing. Just him and his paints and the terrifying canvas of his own company. Month 1, he nearly broke, downloading and deleting Tinder 6 times in a single night. Month 3, he started painting again. Terrible paintings, aggressive paintings, paintings that looked like arguments with God. Month 6, he stopped checking his reflection in windows. Month 9, he painted something that made him cry, not from sadness, but from recognition. Month 12, he extended the vow indefinitely. When I asked him why, he said, "I'm having the best relationship of my life. Why would I ruin it with company?" The monastery of one has rules, though they're written in water and change with the seasons. You eat when hungry, not when it's time. You sleep when tired, not when you should. You read books that make no sense to anyone else. You develop bizarre habits that would embarrass you if witnessed, talking to yourself in foreign accents, dancing badly to music no one else should ever hear, creating elaborate rituals around coffee that would make a barista weep. You become your own ecosystem, weird and self-sustaining and magnificent in its peculiarity. There's a fertility in this solitude that no relationship can match. In the silence, you hear voices, not madness, but creativity, stories you'll never tell, inventions you'll never build, versions of yourself you'll never perform for anyone else. The monastery of one is where men go to give birth to themselves, over and over, without witnesses or midwives. A Tibetan saying goes, "When you can spend a winter alone in a cave, you can spend a lifetime with anyone." But they miss the punchline. After a winter alone in a cave, you might not want to. So, here's my whispered dare, soft as moth wings against window glass. Can you spend 30 days without trying to capture anyone's attention? Without performing your life for an audience that might love you? Can you sit in the magnificent disaster of your own company and discover that you're actually fantastic entertainment? Or will you break, like most do, rushing back to the noise because the silence showed you too much truth? The monastery of one isn't about becoming a hermit. It's about discovering that you're already whole, you've always been whole, and anyone else is just seasoning on a meal that's already complete. She feeds you just enough hope to keep you starving. There's a casino in Monaco where they keep one slot machine that pays out exactly 11% more than it takes in. Just one. They move it around the floor every night, like a constellation shifting through the gambling galaxy. No one knows which machine it is, but everyone's convinced they've found it. The casino makes more money from that single generous machine than all the others combined, because it transforms every player into a treasure hunter, every loss into a near miss, every small win into proof they're getting closer. She is that machine. And you, my friend, you've become a professional gambler in the economy of crumbs, haven't you? Subsisting on microdoses of affection, measured out in Instagram likes, delayed text responses calculated to the minute, and those rare nights when she lets you pretend you matter. You've developed the kind of expertise that comes from starvation. You can taste the difference between a 3-hour response delay, she's busy, and a 4-hour delay, she's teaching you a lesson. You've become a sommelier of emotional scraps. Let me paint you a portrait in wet ash and broken glass. It's Thursday, 11:47 p.m. She's finally responded to your Tuesday text. Sorry, crazy week. That's it. 4 words and an emoji that cost her nothing and cost you everything. You parse it like the Dead Sea Scrolls. The sorry means she remembers you exist. The comma indicates consideration. Crazy week suggests external forces, not internal disinterest. The laughing emoji is casual intimacy. You construct entire civilizations of meaning from these ruins. You're an archaeologist of absence, finding artifacts of love where there's only dirt. The Comte de Lautréamont once wrote that melancholy and sadness are the beginning of doubt, but he never met a man trained in the economy of crumbs. These men have evolved past doubt into something more sinister: hope, geometric, calculated, weaponized hope that measures love in parts per million. Here's how she's trained you, though neither of you would call it that. Variable ratio reinforcement, the same principle that makes cocaine addicts and day traders. She doesn't always respond, but when she does, oh, when she does, it's like finding water in the desert. Last month, she sent you a photo of a sunset with the caption, "Thinking of you." You've looked at it 47 times. You could draw it from memory. That single crumb has sustained you through 3 weeks of famine. The economy of crumbs operates on principles that would make Machiavelli himself genuflect in admiration. First, the law of artificial scarcity. She could text you back immediately. Her phone is grafted to her hand like a technological tumor, but immediate responses would crash the market value of her attention. So, she creates drought to make the rain precious. She's the Federal Reserve of affection, controlling inflation by limiting supply. Second, the principle of elastic demand. The less she gives, the more you want. It's economic poetry. You started needing daily contact, then adjusted to weekly, then became grateful for monthly, and now you're writing sonnets about a woman who remembers your name every other season. Your standards haven't lowered, they've been professionally demolished and rebuilt as a limbo bar set at the Earth's core. A 2025 behavioral economics study from the London School of Economics found that people in intermittent reinforcement relationships show brain activity identical to gambling addicts. The same dopamine spike, the same cortisol crash, the same desperate recalculation of odds. You're not in love, you're at a craps table where the house always wins but occasionally lets you hold the dice. I once knew a surgeon, steady hands, brilliant mind, who spent 2 years chasing a woman who parceled out affection like a wartime ration board. She'd disappear for weeks, then show up at his door at 2 a.m. needing to be held. She'd promise dinners that never happened, cancel plans with such creativity it was almost art. He kept a journal, trying to find patterns in her behavior, like a scientist studying chaos theory. The journal ended with a single line: "I have confused poverty for mystery." But here's the gothic horror of it all. You've become addicted to the hunger itself. Full meals would make you sick now. A woman who texts back immediately feels desperate. Consistent affection feels suffocating. Clear communication feels boring. You have developed a palate for emotional starvation, and now healthy love tastes like cardboard. She knows this, of course, not consciously. That would require a level of self-awareness that would probably make her kinder, but her limbic system knows. Her unconscious has a PhD in behavioral psychology. She can feel your attention waning and throws just enough crumbs to keep you pecking at the ground like a pigeon who's forgotten how to fly. The Spanish have a phrase: "Agua que no has de beber, déjala correr." Water you're not going to drink, let it run. But you've become a desert dweller, collecting drops in broken cups, convinced that accumulation equals abundance. You're hoarding crumbs like they'll eventually form a loaf, but crumbs don't rise, my friend. They just attract rats. Here's what Machiavelli knew that you're still learning. In any economy, the person who needs less controls the person who needs more. The moment you became a crumb collector, you gave her the entire bakery. She's not evil, she's responding to market conditions you created by accepting wholesale prices for retail goods. The men who escape the economy of crumbs don't do it through willpower or therapy or self-help books. They do it through revolution, the sudden violent realization that they've been paying caviar prices for breadcrumbs. They don't gradually want more, they suddenly want nothing. They don't negotiate for better terms, they burn down the casino. So, here's my accusation, delivered like a verdict from a judge who's seen too many of these cases. You're not actually waiting for her to love you properly. You're waiting for the courage to admit that this hunger has become your identity. Without the crumbs, who would you be? A man who has to learn to feed himself? The economy of crumbs doesn't end when she finally gives you a full meal. It ends when you realize you've been sitting in a restaurant the whole time, too focused on the floor to notice the menu. When you finally stop needing love, it arrives like a natural disaster you're prepared for. Listen, come closer. I want to tell you about the moment a man becomes genuinely dangerous to the order of things. It happens at 3 a.m. on an idle Tuesday, or during a traffic jam when the radio's playing something forgettable, or in the middle of sex with someone whose name you'll forget by Thursday. It happens when you realize, not think, not hope, but realize with the certainty of gravity that you'd rather be alone than be someone's rehearsal for happiness. The beautiful catastrophe begins like this. You delete her number, not in anger. Anger would mean you still care. You delete it with the same emotion you would use to throw away expired milk. Then you feel it. That vertigo of standing at the edge of your own life without a safety net, made of someone else's conditional love. Your stomach drops like you've swallowed your own heart. And then, and this is the beautiful part, you laugh. Not a bitter laugh, not a sad laugh, but the laugh of a man who's just realized the prison door was never locked. There's a Syrian myth about a phoenix that doesn't rise from its own ashes, but from the ashes of everything it once thought it needed. It burns down its nest, its collected treasures, its maps to a water, everything. And in that annihilation, it discovers it was never a phoenix at all. It was the fire itself, playing at being a bird. You are about to become fire. The beautiful catastrophe has stages, like grief in reverse. First comes the violence, not toward others, but toward your old self. You throw away the cologne she liked. You delete the playlist titled For Her that she never asked for and never heard. You stop checking your phone like it's a life support machine. You eat garlic for breakfast because no one's going to kiss you, and that's suddenly hilarious. You become feral in the most civilized way possible. Then comes the reconstruction. But you're not rebuilding the old structure. You're creating something alien, something that would terrify your former self. You start saying no to invitations that feel like obligations. You develop opinions that don't require consensus. You spend entire weekends reading philosophy that makes you feel stupid, and physics that makes you feel small, and poetry that makes you feel infinite. You become intellectually promiscuous, emotionally celibate, spiritually anarchistic. Nietzsche wrote about the last man and the overman, but he missed the middle stage, the burning man, the one who stopped trying to preserve himself for future love and started spending himself completely on present existence. This man doesn't save his best stories for dates. He tells them to bartenders and grocers and the wind. He doesn't preserve his energy for potential relationships. He burns it all on 4 a.m. writing sessions, on learning to cook Thai food badly, on conversations with strangers he'll never see again. A 2024 study from the Institute of Behavioral Futures in Stockholm found something remarkable. Men who spent 6 months completely outside the dating market showed increased testosterone, improved sleep quality, and most surprisingly, enhanced creativity scores that jumped an average of 34%. The researchers couldn't explain it, but when you stop performing love, all that energy has to go somewhere. It goes into becoming. Here's what the beautiful catastrophe looks like from the outside. Your friends think you're having a breakdown. You're not posting thirst traps or humble brags. You're not working on yourself in that performative way that's really just preparing for the next audition. You're not bitter or angry or sad. You're just absent from the whole theatrical production. You've become a conscientious objector to the war between the sexes. But from the inside, you're having the kind of fun that would make Dionysus jealous. You're discovering that your own company is actually spectacular when you're not saving your best material for someone else. You're finding that books are better company than most people, that silence is more articulate than small talk, that masturbation is more satisfying than duty sex, that cooking for one is a form of self-respect, not self-pity. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor darker than German expressionist cinema, that's when she appears. Not she the specific, but she the suddenly abundant. Women start noticing you the way cats notice people who are allergic to them. Your disinterest has become charisma. Your absence has become presence. Your completeness has become magnetic. But here's the beautiful catastrophe's greatest joke. You don't want them anymore. Not in that desperate, cavity-filling way. You've become romantically wealthy, and the economy of crumbs looks like what it always was, a soup kitchen for the emotionally impoverished. You might take a lover, but you'll never again take a master. You might share your bed, but you'll never again share your sovereignty. The ancient Greeks had a word, autarkeia, meaning self-sufficiency so complete it borders on the divine. This is what you've become, A closed system, a perfect circuit, a one-man civilization. You've stopped needing love the way plants stop needing greenhouses once they learn to grow wild. I knew a man who reached this state after his third divorce. He sold everything, moved to a cabin in Montana, and spent 2 years talking to no one but the clerk at the general store. When he finally returned to civilization, he was unrecognizable, not physically, but energetically. Women would approach him at coffee shops, in bookstores, at gas stations. When I asked him what had changed, he said, "I stopped being thirsty in the desert and became the oasis. Now everyone wants to drink, but I'm not offering." The beautiful catastrophe isn't about becoming a monk or a misogynist or a hermit. It's about becoming complete. It's about discovering that you were never half of anything. You were always whole, just folded in on yourself, trying to fit into spaces too small for your actual size. Machiavelli wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. But the beautiful catastrophe is when you stop appearing altogether and just start being. No performance, no audience, no reviews, just you, burning through existence like a comet that's forgotten it's supposed to be in orbit around someone else. So here's my final question, posed like a riddle from a sphinx who's tired of eating travelers. What if the love you've been seeking outside was actually the love you've been withholding from yourself? What if every relationship failed, not because you weren't enough, but because you were too much? Trying to compress yourself into someone else's idea of lovable? What if the beautiful catastrophe isn't losing love, but discovering you never needed it? You just needed to stop needing it. The most dangerous man isn't the one who doesn't care about love. It's the one who's so complete in himself that love becomes a choice instead of a necessity. He loves the way mountains love, by existing so thoroughly that people can't help but climb, even though the mountain never asked them to. The beautiful catastrophe ends where it began, with you, alone, at 3 a.m. on an idle Tuesday. But this time, you're not lonely. You're not waiting. You're not hoping. You're just magnificently, catastrophically, beautifully present. And that presence is so complete, so sufficient, so divinely selfish that it becomes the most generous thing you could offer the world. You've stopped chasing what destroys you because you've discovered what completes you, your own beautiful, catastrophic self.